everyone. This is Phil Travis, and this is History 458, the online edition here at EOU. It's week 2, and so hopefully everybody had a really good, smooth first week. I thought what was happening in the discussion forums looked to be pretty good, so talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but it looked like, it looks like everybody's pretty much doing what we should be doing in the discussion forum, so let's keep it up. This week we are reading from Battle Cry Freedom, James McPherson's book. We'll be reading chapter 2. There's also a quiz on this chapter, so make sure you do the reading and take the quiz. What I recommend, when you read, especially a book of this size, you should use a highlighter. And as you read, go through and highlight points that you think are critical points. And then go back and skim through your highlighter points, okay? And if you made any notes in the column, that's good too. Skim through it, and then you can go take your quiz. And not only will you have retained the information you've read a little bit better, but you'll also have a lot of the key points that'll probably wind up being questions on the quiz highlighted, and it'll make it a lot easier for you to pick things out, so that it's easier to take the quiz. So McPherson, Battle Cry Freedom, Chapter 2, and there'll be a quiz on that chapter 2. I recommend you take the quiz Friday, Saturday, Sunday, do the reading, watch my recorded lecture. This week we're looking at the Mexican-American War and also the Compromise of 1850, the California Compromise of 1850, and my recorded lecture is on both of those topics, the Mexican-American War and the California Compromise of 1850. The Mexican-American War was very much a training ground for many future, leaders in the American Civil War. Figures like Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and so forth, sort of like had their first experience, in conflict in the Mexican-American War, which occurred during the presidency of James K. Polk. And of course, the Mexican-American War, too, created new issues with respects to the tension in Congress over slave state and free state, the sort of sectional tensions that dominated the United States at the time. Because, of course, the Mexican-American War resulted in the annexation of significant territories, including California, what would become Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, so forth, that were new additions to the United States. And in the 1850s, every time a new state would come into the Union, it would result in a congressional dispute. And the reason largely was because the southern states were increasingly trying to maintain a balance of power, if you will, in the U.S. Senate. And the reason for this is because they wanted to ensure their ability to, from a legislative standpoint, to be able to prevent any actions by the U.S. government to dictate the future of slavery and thereby the economic course of the South. And so the idea was, of course, the South was already outnumbered in the House of Representatives, which is based on population. So, you were not going to be even there. But in the U.S. Senate, where each state gets 2 senators, the idea was the South, if there was always a balance between free states and slave states, then the South could maintain that balance reasonably, depending on whether or not states entered the Union as free or slave. And if they could maintain that balance in the Senate, then that would be the block to prevent any action to, ban slavery or something like this. So when all these new territories come in and they start organizing themselves as states, like California, it creates a huge crisis in the Union. And we're going to be reading this week, as well as I discussed this in my lecture, the recorded lecture, so please watch those. But we're going to be looking at Zachary Taylor, who, of course, was one of the most significant military commanders of the Mexican-American War. And he was a Southerner. But Zachary Taylor, when he became president, I would say became, in the South's eyes, much less sympathetic to their position on the issue of free state and slave state admittance, particularly pertaining to California. And so we're going to examine Zachary Taylor's role in this issue, the sectional crisis between free state and slave state. And we'll be reading about that, and that's also covered in my weekly recorded lectures. So hopefully everybody is watching that. So I think everybody's doing this, but I just want to give everybody a refresher. Don't forget, on the discussion forum, what I want to see on the discussion forum is one post or one reply, substantial activity. So you've engaged the reading, you watch the videos, you watch my recorded lecture, and then you give a relatively substantial post or reply no later than Thursday. And then I want to see, two replies. So one post, two replies over 2 separate days during the week. So I want to see first activity by Thursday, and I want a total of one post, 2 replies over 2 separate days. So if you made a good reply on Thursday, you posted on Friday, and you replied again on Sunday, that's fine, you're good. If you made a post on Thursday and then you replied twice on Saturday, that's good. You fulfill requirements for the discussion forum. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear with that. Also this week, even though this is found at the end of your syllabus, I have posted the prompt for the paper, the main paper, as well as a template for the paper proposal. So in this class, you are asked to write a 6 to 9 page research paper, and during week 5, you have to submit a proposal for that paper. The paper's due shortly after the end of week 10. I believe it's due Tuesday after the end of week 10 during exam week. But you submit a proposal, and we'll talk more about this as we get closer to it. We submit a proposal on the 5th week, and then the paper's due 5 weeks after that. So I've placed in modules, even though it's at the end of the syllabus, I've placed in modules the paper prompt as well as the proposal template. So have a look at that. We're also writing a book review in this class. That's due week 7. More information will be forthcoming on that. If you want to get a head start about thinking about what a book review looks like, go to our library webpage and search for something like the Journal of American History and look up books, academic books, and look for their reviews. And there'll be numerous reviews of academic books, always in the Journal of American History, and you can get an idea of what a historian's book review looks like. They're not long; they're 500 to 600 words usually, but that doesn't mean they're easy to write. All right, last piece of information for this week. As many of you know, because many of you have been in my classes before, you know that we do a fun extra credit activity in this class, and we're going to start the extra credit activity this week. The extra credit activity is super easy, and the way it works is this. You simply watch my announcements no later than Wednesday during the week. And in the announcements, I'll fill you in on what's going on and everything in the class. But towards the end of the announcements, I will note a factoid, okay? And the factoid is something, kind of interesting and curious about the historical subject that we're discussing. All you have to do is send me an email no later than Wednesday by midnight and just restate the factoid. And then I take your email factoid and I take it and I put it in a special email folder. So I tabulate everything in there. I won't reply to everyone all the time. If you ask me a question, I'll reply to it. Sometimes I'll say thanks. Sometimes you won't get a message from me on the factoid. It doesn't mean I didn't get it, but it gets tabulated in a folder. So it's a fun activity, and the way it works, you get 1 point added to your midterm or your final exam for each factoid you do. If you do all 9 of them, I give you a bonus point. You get 10 points. So if you do all of these factoids, you get 10 bonus points on either your midterm or your final at the end of the term. And to give you an idea, that's the difference in about 3 grade points on your final score. So it could be the difference in a minus, an A minus or an A, or a B or a B plus, or a C or a B minus, So it's a fun way to get some extra points, and it's another way that I like to kind of connect with you on the subject that we're dealing with. And generally speaking, I think students like getting extra credit, and I think this is a particularly fun way to get extra credit. So just email me the factoid no later than Wednesday by midnight. And here is the factoid. So in the 1850s, as I just mentioned, and you'll hear a lot about this in this week's presentation, but this issue, in the 1850s, there was an increasing crisis over whether new states would be admitted into the Union as slave or free. And southern states increasingly wanted new territories or states, when they're admitted as states, to be admitted as slave territories or slave states. Because if you have a slave state come in, that means you have two senators that go to the U.S. Congress representing slave states. The rationale with this was that as long as they could maintain a balance in the Senate of free to slave states, that it would be impossible for a northern-dominated government to sort of dictate the future of slavery in the South, and likewise what they saw as the economic well-being of the South. So this issue, the issue of slave state and free state, became a huge crisis leading up to the Civil War in the late 1840s and the 1850s. Well, at certain times, there were individuals from the South that came up with sort of interesting ideas for including new slave states to the Union, and one of the one that is maybe one of the more curious is the case of William Walker. William Walker was from Tennessee, and what he did, and this is very significant because there was also a lot of economic benefit of this. But he went in the mid-late 1850s. It happens really in 1856. He went to Nicaragua with a band of individuals and ultimately got some recruits there and ultimately overthrew the government of Nicaragua and declared himself the president of Nicaragua. At the time, Nicaragua was the route that shipping had to take to go from New York to San Francisco. There was no canal in Panama, and there were ideas about building a canal in Nicaragua, actually. But the way it would work is the ships would sail down from New York, they would sail up the San Juan River, they would sail across the big Lake Nicaragua, and then they would take things from Stagecoach over to the Pacific Ocean, where they would go on other ships, and then they would go up to San Francisco. So William Walker seizes control of Nicaragua, declares himself the president of Nicaragua for a short period of time. Franklin Pierce, the U.S. president, actually recognized William Walker's government. And William Walker, and this is how the sectional free state, slave state comes in, William Walker sort of tried to appeal to Southerners in the United States by suggesting that Nicaragua might perhaps be made a new slave state to the United States, hence giving them two more senators for slave states in the U.S. government. And so William Walker, the factoid, William Walker overthrows the government of Nicaragua, declares himself president, to a large degree because of the ability to control that important shipping across Nicaragua. But also behind all of this was this idea that perhaps Nicaragua could be brought into the United States as a new slave state, and thereby could help the South when it came to the balance of power in the U.S. Senate between slave states and free states, which Southern slave states felt was integral to allow them to basically protect the economic institution of slavery. William Walker, by the way, was ultimately put to death by firing squad in 1860 by a collective, really, of Central American states, but particularly at the lead of the Honduran government. Okay, that's a long announcement this week. I acknowledge I'll try to keep them shorter, but interesting topic. I hope everybody gets into it, and I hope everything's pretty clear. Let me know if you have any questions, and let's have a great week, guys. Okay.